Hey, Shane,
Yes, Mance?
have you seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers?
No.
Well, have you seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers?
No.
Well, you have now.
Yep, I have seen the 1956 Invasion of the Body Snatchers and then its subsequent remake, the 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
So this is a fun, interesting episode. It's the first time we've done this. We're doing a movie and its remake in one.
Yeah.
Because they're super similar and also so different.
Yeah.
In a very fascinating way. And you are also a sci-fi nerd.
Yes.
I think is safe to say.
Can confirm.
Actively while we're recording this, I'm looking at every Blade Runner pop known to man. So I couldn't believe you hadn't seen these.
Yeah.
One of them is like a staple of 1950s, like pulp serial kind of type thing, at least in the sci-fi genre.
Yeah.
And the 70s one is a like really cool underground little horror movie.
Yeah. I mean, like, the 78 one's like a stone cold classic, right? Like,
I would maybe argue that both are.
well, for sure. But like
another interesting way that like both a movie and its remake are hyper famous.
Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, like I was definitely much more aware of the 1978 one versus the 1956 one.
That is true. I think you're absolutely right. When people hear Invasion of the Body Snatchers, they always will think the Donald Sutherland remake.
I mean, like, it's got Donald Sutherland, Jeff Goldblum, Spock.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's got much more recognizable faces to people in 2022.
Yeah.
Because I like other than I can't remember her name, but she plays the original Morticia Addams. She is in this movie, and she is by far the most recognizable to me here in 2022. But even then, I didn't recognize that while watching the movie. Megan pointed that out after the movie was over. She was like, "Hey, did you recognize Morticia Addams?" And I was like, "What?" Yeah. So yeah. I'm glad that I finally got introduced to these two. I'm a little interested to go in and watch the other remakes now a little bit. Yeah. Like, I know they're not nearly as good, or at least just not as good, because there's the like 92 version, which is Body Snatchers, and then there's the 2007 version, which is The Invasion,
and not even to include all of the other like within under the same house movies,
right?
You know? Also, this story I think is one of those weird ones, kind of like A Star Is Born. It's a blanket story that we just retell over and over.
Right.
Again.
Okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I feel that.
It's a bit like Romeo and Juliet. It's a bit like Shakespeare in that like there's so many versions across the sphere of movies. Like,
it's whatever decade it's adapted in, you can kind of apply the
paranoia of the time.
Yeah, like the politics and the thoughts of the time. I think that was definitely what makes the kind of the difference between these two even more interesting.
Coming into these, I was like, for sure you were going to love both of them. And I was a little surprised that you weren't as into the original, I think.
I really liked the first one, but I love the 1978 one.
1970, and I think most people would probably agree with that. Like, most people probably like the 78 one more.
Right.
And I kind of told you, and this is my big thing. The reason we're doing these in one is they're like the same movie with the same beats that happen.
Yes, yeah. They're very, very, very similar.
But they have different main characters and different jobs.
Yeah.
There's a bit of thematic difference, like we said, based on the time period. The location's different.
Yeah.
But really, if you look at them side by side, you go, oh, this is that scene from the, or this is that scene from the, like
the
beat
plot
for beat.
And even some dialogue is like fully ripped from one to the other with some minor changes.
Yes.
I mean, like the dialogue is much more much more changed.
The 70s one is like 20 to 30 minutes longer.
Yeah.
And it is much darker.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah.
that is a product of it being the 70s where every movie had to end horribly for everyone.
Yeah.
Which I love. I'm super into it. In the 50s one ends with a bit of like hope. The 50s one kind of gets to have its cake and eat it too, of like the heroes still get to get away with it, but also bad things.
Did you know this was based off of a book?
I didn't know this was based off a book. You know what? Actually, frankly, I probably did know that.
Yeah.
That now that you say that, it sounds super familiar.
This is based off a book. Do you know how the book ends?
No. How does the book end?
The aliens just leave. Like the humans put up enough of a fight for the aliens to be like, all right,
we out, dude.
All right, since you really don't want us here, we'll go. All right. You don't gotta push.
That's kind of the worst.
Yeah, like
maybe they make it work. I don't know.
Like I think the kind of more hopeful ending in the 56 version, like that totally works for me. But there's something just so beautifully cynical about the 78.
No, you know me. I love a dark ending. Like
also,
I love
spoilers for
these 30 and 50-year-old movies.
A nearly 70-year-old movie and a, what is it, like nearly, a little over 40-year-old movie.
Yeah. So here's the thing. They're different. I've seen them now both twice.
Yeah.
And I was impressed, like because I watched one in film school, the original. Because did you know I went to film school?
I thought about making a joke about it, but I was like, you know what? I'll just let him say. I'll just let it slide.
Thank you for giving me that one. So yeah, I watched that then and was really enamored with it. Like I thought it was awesome. And then a couple of months later, I found one of them on Amazon Prime, the remake on Amazon Prime. So I watched it. Was also super into it. But rewatching the original the other night, it like really stuck out to me because I was thinking about the remake while watching it, where I was like, wow, the 50s one is kind of about more, or at least they have more of an emotional angle on what's happening.
I agree with that. I agree
it feels more thematic. And it feels like they want to explore the thematic that they're going after, their take on it. They want to explore, because the 70s one, the difference being, right, the 50s one is so like in its 50s way, and it's like big emotion, big whatever. It is so about human connection and how people intuitively know, and this town is all that, and like they're like, well, how would you know if it was really me? And he kisses her and she's like, oh yeah, that's you. And then at the end that pays off where he kisses her and immediately realizes it's not her.
Yeah.
It's like it's so about love and connection, and that is the thing that makes them. The 70s one has that for sure, but it does brush like the moment when we find out she has turned the in the 50s one, it's like the heart stopper of the movie.
Right.
Whereas in the 70s one, there's a whole rest of the third act, and then it ends on the crazy dark note that he's been turned. But the big thing for me is that like there's something to be said about playing one for like devastation and one for horror. Where the 70s one is definitely horror, where like she's disintegrating in front of, like in his arms, and then she stands up like naked and completely emotionless and talks to him like right there in the moment, and he knows immediately, versus the subversion of the other one where we think, oh, she's okay, but wait, something feels wrong, and then he kisses her and realizes, and then they have their conversation. They're played for different intentions.
I would say there's a very similar amount of devastation in the 78 version.
Well, okay, I should say it's again, it's played differently. It's played
differently
for a different type of moment. You know what I mean? Like there's something to be said about him knowing she's disintegrating in his arms. Like, yes, he's devastated, but also he's like, I love you. But she was like in a committed relationship 24 hours ago.
Right.
And he was not. You know what I mean? This other one, it's like they were sweethearts from back in the day, and they kind of messed up and married people and both got divorced, and they're refinding each other. And so it's like there is that element of like history played into it, which makes me buy the relationship specifically between the two leads in the 50s one more.
I agree and disagree, because like they've spent years away from each other in the time that they were a fling, and now they're kind of like back together. Where like Donald Sutherland and what's her name? The two leads in the 78 version see each other every day.
No, okay, and you're right about that. But again, that plays into what I'm saying about theme and how the first one is like they come back after years of being apart and immediately are like rekindling that, and they know it's each other. And the second she turns, he kisses her and is like, this isn't her.
Yeah.
And he knows. You know what I mean? I think they steer into that angle of this story way harder than the 78 version. Not to the 78 versions, like, not to discredit it, because I think what it's doing is being way more of like a horror movie, a paranoia, this like being lost in a city that, like, not recognizing the place you've lived your whole life. Like, that's what the story of the 71 is about.
I mean, it's like being stuck in a big city and being like, it's like claustrophobic. It's like these people that you've spent your, like the 50s version is very much about like this outside force penetrating your community. And the 78 version is very much about like these people that you didn't know before. You never knew these people, but now they're a threat, or they could be a threat. Like the fact that you don't know any of these people makes them infinitely more threatening, because you can't tell. No, now you can't tell if they're changed or not. Like with the 56 version, it's like, everybody in the town, and more or less you can tell when people are changing. But when in the 78 version is that person across the street, you have no idea who they are, and you have no idea if they're changed.
Well, I'll say this. The 78 version goes out of its... Or not the 78, sorry. The 50s version goes out of its way to go... Even people you've known your whole life, there's a difference between knowing someone your whole life and knowing someone intimately. And it's these people like... He's the town doctor. He sees these people regularly, and he sees them, and he's like, that's her. What do you mean? Like, this is like, they'll come to him and be like, that's not my son, or that's not my father-in-law, or whatever it is.
Right.
And he'll go talk to him, and he's like, it's them. I don't know what you want me to do. But at the second, like, everyone who's like, it's an intimate person, it's her father, it's her father-in-law, it's the son's mother. It's these people that they know so cellularly almost, that they can tell intuitively. And when she changes, she's the person that he knows so cellularly that he knows instantly. What the 70 or the 51, because I love your take. I love this idea of like they're now a threat. But what I love about the 50s one is it's deeper than that. It's like genuine, so close connection. That's how they start telling. Because there are parts in the movie where like, oh, you made it, and then the other person will walk in the room and you realize he hasn't. But he's talking to him for a second.
Right.
But it's just a friend of his. It's not like somebody he knows deeply and intimately. It's just a guy he knows.
Yeah.
Guy he knows well, even. I like that deepness of the connection between two people, for them to be able to tell just intuitively. Mm-hmm. I think that's fascinating. I think that's beautiful. And also so sad when they lose it. Not to discredit the 70s version, which I also really like. And I like that take of like, they're a threat now, and he's talking to people he never knew before. And why is he doing that? There's no way he knows them. I followed him all day. And it's also deeply interesting to me.
Yeah.
It's just different, where I like the thematic of like love and connection is what lets us know that this is happening.
Like, I think there's something interesting to be said about like the time periods these were made in, because the 1956 one was very much in the middle of the Cold War. So I think there's something interesting to be said about the fact that like it's very much about like these outside forces coming and penetrating your community. Mm-hmm. I think that's definitely like an interesting like way of looking at the 1956 one.
And to be clear, I love both of these movies. I think they're both really cool. And I definitely love that the 78 one goes full hog into horror and like body horror stuff. Like, you're watching these bodies grow out of pods, and they're like have no noses, and they're flailing around in goo.
Right.
And it crushes their heads. It's like, that's nuts.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's the part of the 78 one that I really love. Is all the effects and stuff.
I think the like horror and the like thrilling moments are infinitely more effective in the 78 version than
when they're supposed to be. The first one, I wouldn't even necessarily describe the original as a horror movie. I would call it more of like a thriller, like a paranoid thriller kind of thing. Right. And then the 78 one, the smartest decision it makes, in my opinion, is making it a horror movie.
Right.
Making it like terrifying at times, where there's like people and they're just screeching, and you're like, this is fucked up, dude. Yeah. I love that. I think that's so cool. Let me ask you this question wise, like, did you like how the 78 one was filmed?
Yeah.
It's very off the cuff. It's got a weird camera movement, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, they're very like, there's I'm thinking specifically the montage where he's like trying to call people. He's at the payphone and he's like looking at the people around the city. And he's like peering in and out. It's just very loose and he's not really in a power position in the frame. He's just kind of peeping in and out. I thought that was interesting because that didn't peak to me. Like, it I didn't notice it the first time I watched it. It was on a rewatch, so I was like, oh, this is shot really interestingly.
Yeah, I think a lot of the like lighting is very like film noir-esque in like a really cool way.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
But the movement isn't. Like the movement feels very like 70s like cinema verite, almost like documentary style.
That was what I would describe it as. Is like it's weird. There's sections specifically where it feels weirdly documentary-ish, which is so fucking cool.
Yeah.
Like I'm all about that.
Yeah, that specifically that scene of him like at the payphone and like calling people, it feels like so disorienting.
Yeah.
And like again, like claustrophobic. Like they're just surrounded by all of these people and they have no idea if literally all of them are snatched or not. I just think that's like, I think it's like super effective.
Yeah. No, and again, it's that. And then whenever things start hitting the fan, I think it's like, I love how all that stuff is shot with like a lot of times you'll see the body snatched people like coming out of like beams of light where you can't really see their faces anymore because they've become part of the collective. Right. I think that is a really interesting way to do it. I mean, there's the scene whenever they're running from his house after he's crushed the head of the pod person, and like the hands are just wrapping around like they're monsters.
Yeah.
They weigh up that angle, and I think that's really interesting and cool. Like, I think it definitely plays more into the hive mind aspect of this. Like to the point where like at the end of the day or at the end of the movie, Donald Sutherland's like living out a day.
Yeah.
And they're just like doing jobs, but like she's just sitting there in the chair, like just looking, and then she turns a dial and then goes back to sitting there.
Right.
And that's what everyone's doing.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because the 70s, or I keep saying the 70s one, the 50s one is completely uninterested in what they would do with the world if they won.
Right.
And this movie gives you that like 2 or 3 minutes where you get to explore that.
I think that definitely leans into kind of what I was saying earlier about like how the kind of politics of the area lean into like how they lean into the politics of the area. You know, like the 70s were very like, I think they called it the me generation or something like that. That was very focused on like self-actualization and like, you know, finding yourself and being yourself, where it's like, and that's what this movie is. It's like people fighting to keep their humanity and their themselves, you know, rather than like trying to fight against this hive mind, this like oneness, this sameness that everybody, that this
being a cog in the machine.
Exactly. And that's what they're trying to fight against.
And I think that's the cool thing about the story itself is, like you said, depending on where it's plopped, depending on what era you're in when this comes out, it works.
Right.
You just have to find what the thing is and then tell the story about that, which is why the difference between the two is so interesting to me.
Right.
Of like, one's about like a doctor in a small town. I mean, the setting obviously changing it is way bigger than you would think it would be. Like, because the small town, because the new one doesn't really put too much of an emphasis on the big town nature of it, like the big city. It's just a part of it. It's a backdrop, and you definitely feel it. But they're not like, we're in the city this time. That's not what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's in a city, and so it's way more terrifying, like you said, to see an ocean of people you don't recognize.
Yeah.
Which takes away from the not knowing your neighbor anymore, the scary part of that.
Yeah.
But substitutes it by making the first interactions we're seeing are with people that characters know. So it's like, it's her boyfriend, and then they take her to see a therapist, and he's dealing with people all across the city. It's like, it peeks into that world in it through a personal lens, and then turns into till it gets out of hand. And it's literally, you're not only afraid of the people you know, you're afraid of the people you don't. And I think that's the interesting angle.
And like, I mean, it's just the fact that like there are so many more people that they're surrounded by. Like they're just like fully surrounded the entire time. And you don't know if they're snatched or not. You know what I mean? That's why I feel like it's just so much more effective. And that like you said, like that's definitely the intention, to make it like that much more effective and that much more like claustrophobic, to be like just fully surrounded by people who could or could not be snatched, you know?
I mean, other things, is there a set of characters you connected with more?
I mean, from one as opposed to the other?
Yeah, like, because the interesting thing is like one of them, they kind of fill roles of being like, one's a doctor, one's a public health investigator, like I think is technically what he is. He's like the health inspector guy.
Yeah, yeah.
But like he does clearly does more than that, because he seems to be like investigating these, the whole thing with the rat turd.
Right.
Like, that was another thing I noticed this time is I liked the other character more. I liked the doctor more, even though it's like the 50s big kind of, maybe I was just in the mood for it this time, which is also, I think, a big thing that plays into this is which version of this story are you going to be in the mood for? Right. You're going to be in the mood for the body horror, crazy, dark one, or are you going to be in the mood for like that era of the 50s that made these types of sci-fi movies, and that's what it is. And it was fun and adventurous almost. Like, yeah. And I think this last go around, I was way more in the mood for that. Because on my IMDb, or not my IMDb, my Letterboxd ratings are both 3.5 stars. These are both 3.5 star movies for me. I really like both of them, but I like them kind of equally. I just think maybe that's what it is. Maybe the 50s one, it's just themes played for me better this time.
I like I said at the beginning, I think I like the new one quite a bit more, or not the new one, the 70s version quite a bit more, just because I thought it was so much more effective for me. It's like, I understand what you're saying about the themes playing better for you, but like, just the movie as a whole worked more for me, and include like the cinematography, the editing, the score, the acting, all of it played, I think, a little bit better for me.
And I think I agree that things play better. It's just that core relationship in the OG one, as big as it is and as much of a leap they ask you to take with it. I think the idea of two people loving each other, I just don't buy that they love each other in the new one, even though I buy that like these two people would be friends and maybe even have a little bit of an attraction for one another. I think, to me, when I'm watching it, so much of it plays as like a fear response to this, whereas the first one clearly shows before they know anything is going on, they're starting to fall for each other again. Right. So it's not like fear brought us together. It's, oh, and then we were thrust into this further. Just that specific conceit works better for me in the original.
That makes sense.
That is why I enjoy the. Plus, I like I've seen a lot of 70s. I've seen way more 70s movies than I've seen 50s movies. So like that 50s still feels kind of like fun and snappy to me. You know what I mean? And I think that's a big part of it too. But yeah, no, I think they're both staples of sci-fi in equal measure. I think culturally, we talked a little bit, but culturally the 70s one is way more remembered, way more probably liked, because I think more people have seen it. Yeah. Because
it's also like, it's without the 50s version, the 70s version wouldn't exist.
Yeah. And without the book, that wouldn't exist. Without writing, the book wouldn't exist. So basically what I'm saying is I have no point. Yeah, no, I fully expected you to like dig these hard.
I definitely really dig the 70s one hard. I like the first one quite a bit. Yeah. But the 70s one, I'm
yeah, really and look, don't get me wrong, like the 70s one is, and I think that's the one I own on Blu-ray. That being said, it's harder to find the 50s one on Blu-ray. Right. But I do
just burn your own, man. Just download it.
I do not condone. Yeah, I think that'll probably the 20. Do you think it earns its extra 30 minutes completely? Like, because I'm trying to think what exactly they don't really add.
No, they just expand. Slow it down.
They slow it down a lot. They definitely add more in the first act. They don't do a like the original, the 50s starts with him like it starts with where the main character ends up and then catches up to that. It flashes back, catches up to it, and then finishes the story. Yeah. The 71 does not do that. It definitely is that prologue where we're seeing the plant grow, and then we're seeing her get the pod and take it. It's like it introduces us that way. But I also think the 70s one has a benefit of, at the time, I have to imagine the 50s one was more well-known. Mm-hmm. So I think it has the benefit of doing it. Other movies have done this. I talk about the Blair Witch Project. And then not the remake, but like the sequel that came out way later called Blair Witch. Yeah. It's the reason people do not like Blair Witch. They're not into it. They don't like, at least critically. But the thing that's interesting about that movie is they don't try to convince you it's real. Yeah. They just tell a spooky story. And I think there has to be something said for that. And I think the 70s one is smart in going, look, people know this is a body snatcher movie. We're not going to be subtle about it. Right. But we're going to introduce you in an interesting way to the idea of what it is and then tell you why that's horrifying. Yeah. And in a post like 2020 COVID-19 pandemic era, this movie is horrifying, right? This idea of like something spiraling out of control and infecting everyone around you and being afraid of the people you like are looking at.
Yeah, I think it could be remade next year and be super, super, super effective. In the same way that like in the 50s you've kind of got the Cold War fears, and in the 70s you've got the like self-actualization,
individuality,
and I think there's definitely something to be said about it having They've done this. This will be the 5th remake, the 5th in-universe remake or whatever.
In-universe. It just keeps happening over. That's what we don't see is every single time they leave.
There's a theory that the 78 one's just a sequel.
That's really interesting.
Because the lead actor, makes a cameo. The lead actor from the 56 version, I have his name written down. I need to remember it. Hold on. Kevin McCarthy cameos in the movie. There's a theory that he's been running since then. He's like been on the run from these things since then. Look, it's definitely not true because we literally see the aliens leave the planet at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
We see them leave their planet and land on Earth at the very beginning of the movie. So it's like, obviously that's like not what happens, like but it's a fun theory.
The way I would make that work, right, is like he's doing the thing he does towards the end of the original where he's like, they're coming, oh no, and he's running on the highway. Like my point would be that's that, but instead of getting picked up by someone, he gets hit by a car, so they flood out of the town and take over the city.
Right.
That would be how to make that work, which I honestly think is interesting. Like he's been dealing with this but elsewhere, and then he shows up and dies before he can save the day, which is what happens to fucking Donald Sutherland. Like he has that little triumphant moment, right, where he's like hacking down the thing and burning down the plant, and it's like this means nothing. They probably have 100 of these already set up, but it still goes out of its way to do a whole third act climax kind of thing.
Yeah, I thought the sound in the 78 version was incredibly interesting.
The kind of like pulsing type thing. Not
just
pulsing,
everything, literally everything they did with the sound.
Yeah.
Like there's so many moments of like near dead silence. Like literally the only thing you can hear is like their breath. Mm-hmm. You should be able to hear other sounds, but you can't. Like, or their like footsteps or, like very, like they drop things out of the mix like all the time. And then there are other points like what like we were talking about earlier with the telephone booth, where it's like super kind of loud and bombastic. You hear a ton of voices and phone calls and footsteps and cars and all this traffic sound. Like I think they do a lot of really cool, interesting edits with the sound. Which this was sound edited by Ben Burt of Star Wars fame. So shout out Ben Burt. And then so I was watching a video about this earlier, and it mentioned that apparently, so this is one of the first Dolby surround sound movies. And this was apparently Dolby's favorite movie to show off Dolby surround sound. So like in like tech demos and stuff, they would show Invasion of the Body Snatchers as their like tech demo movie, which I just thought that was really interesting. This is Denny Zeitlin, the composer of the movie. This is an only movie. He did not compose any other films.
Did you do TV? What did he do?
No.
Get a job at McDonald's?
No, he was a jazz musician and a psychiatrist. And he was a friend of the director. And so the director asked him to come and make this movie, and he loved the project, but it was like really crazy working hours. And so he turned down all the other projects that people offered him, which I think is crazy because I think the score is really good. The score is
super cool. It's very, very funny and out there.
And did you know that the director, not only the director, but the lead actor, which I've already mentioned, but the director also makes a cameo in the 78 version?
As?
He's the taxi driver.
That's cool.
That's the director of the 1956 version.
That's very cool.
Also, what the fuck was the cameo with Robert Duvall at the beginning of the movie? I was like, I didn't know Robert Duvall was in this movie. He's the guy.
No. I remember.
He's the priest at the beginning of the movie. He's literally on screen for 15 seconds.
He was hurting for work.
Apparently.
I wonder if there's like a deleted scene somewhere where that pays off. I can't imagine because the funny thing is it's like he's a priest on a swing with a child.
Yeah.
There's dark undertones to that. Now.
Right. Looking back.
Revisionistly, there's the dark undertones to
man,
that.
It works even better now.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, I have no idea what that's about.
Yeah, I thought that was really weird. I was like, why is... Apparently the director thinks that like in his mind he was the first snatched. He was the first one who got snatched.
Oh, because he's kind of watching her take it. Yeah. That's interesting. I kind of like that idea.
Yeah,
that's very cool.
If you watch it, he's like watching over not only her taking the flower,
dude,
but also the kids.
That's a great scene. At the when we meet Leonard Nimoy's character for the first time. He's a therapist, like a famous therapist, and he's talking to all the psychiatrists. Yes, thank you. He wrote a book. They go so much. Jeff Goldblum's character is obsessed with the fact that he wrote a book. Sometimes it takes me 6 months to write a line.
Why is that? Because I choose every word.
there's that scene when they're having the blow up and he's like settled down the couple and he's like holding both of them and she's watching the crowd as certain people turn and watch the situation. So unsettling.
That happens
so cool.
Everywhere.
A lot. Yeah, it's
everywhere.
so cool.
They'll just be walking down the hallway and you'll just watch one person in the background like stop and turn.
Yeah, no, the movie goes out of its way. It's like what you're saying. The effectiveness of it as a horror movie is that they do things like that and it makes you. I talk about it kind of like, it's like when I watch Zodiac. And I know this is not intentional because I've never heard Fincher talk about this. I've never heard anyone talk about this. But there's a lot of scenes in Zodiac where there's just like, it'll be a set and then there's a point when it's just blackness from beyond. Mm-hmm. And every time I watch it, I'm like, fuck, are they being watched from the darkness? Like every time.
Is the Batman in there?
Yeah, it's like, is the Robert Pattinson, please come out. Yeah, no, that's an interesting, I love that element of the directing.
Apparently, when they talked about doing this movie again, the director talked to the original director and the original actor, and he said, like, what would you want to see from a remake? And they said we would want it to be funnier and we'd want it to be darker. Which the funnier thing I thought was interesting, and did you notice any additional humor? Like, there's some levity, there's some like fun, nice little conversations, but I wouldn't say it's funnier.
It's not funny.
No, but it is darker.
It's also a weird take.
Yeah.
I want the Paranoid movie to be silly. I mean, Jeff Goldblum's in it, and Jeff Goldblum's like a naturally funny person, but like it's not a comedy.
But he's not even being like. There's that like one scene of him at the party.
No, it's
like,
is
and
him
that's
at
like it.
Him
like,
at the beginning is just very like. Well, I mean, there's some of the stuff later when he's like sniffing the flower, and they're like, "Put it down." He's like, "Why? Why?
Yeah, okay,
why?"
Yeah.
And then he like slams it down like a child. Like,
right, fair.
It's
just
not,
Jeff Goldblum things.
Yeah, it's not funny.
It's not funny. But I think
the director just took the half of that note.
Yeah, but I do think that's a bit like them wanting to make it darker than the original. Yeah, and I think and they achieved that with that.
Oh, it's definitely
creepy
darker.
Ass ending.
The creepy ass end. I mean, the whole movie's darker. They don't flinch away from the stuff that the 50s one did, probably because of it was the 50s.
Right.
I mean, it's way grosser. And also them being absorbed in the 50s one is very like not shown. Like we see the pod people grow, but we don't really see what happens to the actual people.
Right.
Where in this one, it shows that they fucking disintegrate. And
did we ever see that at all? Like anything happen to the original person?
No, and because I think that's actually kind of a plot hole in the 50s one is at the end when she turns, was there a pod there?
Yeah.
Where,
I mean, on literally other side of the hill.
But did that other one run up?
Right.
Well, because that's where he was. He was checking over there, and then he came back. So that's like a plot. Not that I care. Not that I give a shit.
Yeah.
It's a movie from the 50s. I love that ending, and I love that moment. But yeah, no, we don't see that. And in this one, it's interesting because they don't tell you what's happening exactly. Like Jeff Goldblum has that comment. He's like, I feel very dry.
Yeah.
You know, because it's literally like wilting him. But when she's asleep in the house and he's rushing back and her pod is growing out in the garden.
Yeah.
And like you see her face and it's like cracked. And it's like it's gross. It's super gross.
Yeah.
I also love whenever she's disintegrating and then you can kind of see the wire pulling on her skin and stuff.
Yeah.
In a couple moments. It's super cool. I love the lo-fi-ness of that effect.
It still looks great though.
Oh, it looks great and it's super effective. I just like that it's a little bit like it's a low budget movie.
Right.
But it doesn't feel like a low budget movie.
Right.
In the coolest way. Because those effects are like the half-formed bodies. The one effect that I'm a little like, I get what's happening is the dog effect. When like the human face runs out, I was a little bit like, did we need this? Like,
it definitely is surprising.
Yeah, it just feels like a little bit like, that's the funny one. That's the one where you just kind of chuckle where you're like, oh, they cross-pollinated and created something new. But like, and it is interesting that it's like any living thing. So even dogs and animals are being body snatched, which is also fascinating. Yeah. Just this idea of like, even they will become these emotionless, like what do dogs do for the rest of the time? Right. You know what I mean? I think that's interesting. I will say that again, the 50s one is more fun.
Right.
It's like got everything that a 50s sci-fi movie does, but it does it really well and really entertainingly to me. Yeah. And then the 70s one is, again, intention. It's the intention of the story. Right. So what they're trying to do with it. And I think both succeed tremendously with what they want to do, with the stories they want to tell.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just like because of the intention of the 78 one just worked better for me. Like it just played better for me this time.
Well, I'm glad because legit after the first one, I did not think you were going to vibe with it.
I mean, I liked the first one.
I know.
You're
Just
acting like I
a-
disliked
No,
the
just
first
after
one.
we watched it, you were just like, I want to think about it, and then you just never brought it up again because
Yeah.
we were gonna do this. But usually we have just like 5-minute conversation about it.
Yeah.
And you just didn't, and so I was like, you probably just didn't
I mean,
like
I
it
did
that much.
say I liked it. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I liked it. You want to move on into the B segment?
Sure.
So we already had this discussion a little bit, but I do think it's an interesting discussion to kind of bring up again. So the other night, me, Megan, and Spencer went and saw The Shining, and we had I had an incredibly weird experience watching this movie. So we went and saw it in the theater on Halloween, and we had an incredibly weird experience with this movie because I don't think The Shining is funny almost at all. Like, there are certain scenes, like, yes, I can understand laughing at, but like even then, like, I don't even understand like fully belly laughing. Like, blowing a little air out of your nose is one thing, or like in like shocked amusement is another thing, but like openly laughing, I could not imagine doing. But the theater that we were in, everyone was laughing like the entire time. Like, there were a few moments where the theater got quiet and let the moment play. But then there are other moments which I don't think are funny at all. Again, like, at least not funny enough to like openly laugh at, like in a theater of people. And like the whole time the audience was laughing. So like, to you, is The Shining funny?
No, it's about domestic abuse. I don't find
Yeah,
that
it's about
funny.
like alcoholism and domestic abuse.
Not funny.
Right.
We talked about this, and what I kind of, my take on it was, one, The Shining is now like a zeitgeist movie. It's like a pop culture movie in a lot of ways. Hyper famous, hyper recognizable. And so I think a lot of people were, well, it's also to be said, this is an Alamo Drafthouse. Normally they're very good, but it's on Halloween. So I think a lot of people were like, let's get drunk and go see a movie. And a lot of people were drinking alcohol. So I think it was a very inebriated screening.
That's probably fair.
I think that is part of it. I also think there's an element when you go see some of these like hyper famous, hyper zeitgeisty movies that you get people who are like, he said the thing I remember. And when you add alcohol into that, I think people are doing that. I also think The Shining is far more complex and asks you to sit in uncomfortable situations far more like frequently per minute, if we want to calculate it, than most movies most audience members go and see.
Right.
So I think a natural response, a hyper common response to uncomfortable situations is laughter. Yeah. Trying to diffuse the tension with laughter. So you laugh and it diffuses the tension for everyone. Now, I've seen this movie in the theater before. This is not my first time seeing it in the theater. I saw it back when the 4K came out for whatever anniversary that was. I went and saw it in the theater. Not as packed of a crowd, but definitely people, and it was dead silent in that movie. And I had seen The Shining before that just at home. Was not scared of it at home. I was terrified in the theater when I went and saw it because all of us shut the hell up, sat in an uncomfortable ass movie, and then had all those experiences. So it was super effective. So I was really excited to go see it and see if I felt that again. But you're right. The second people started laughing, I was like, oh, I'm not going to be scared. Yeah. It's too much of a like, and again, I think it's a mixture of the two things I said. It's a pop culture zeitgeist movie with drunk people who were like, hey, look, it's the thing I know. And then the other side of it is people were uncomfortable because I think they probably remember The Shining being a little bit more of a horror movie. For these people who haven't seen it in 10 years. Yeah. They probably think of it as more of a horror movie. And then it's like this really deep, subtle, gives you no answers whatsoever to really heavy subject matter. Yeah. And I think they broke. Like, that's where I thought. But no, it's not a comedy. It's not funny. Jack Nicholson is occasionally doing something funny. He's giving a very big performance.
It's like, you could argument that like him, like, here's Johnny, things like that. Like, I understand, like, and to your point, like, yeah, it is like you said, like, it's like a cultural touchstone at this point. It's like, I understand having a reaction to some of these huge moments, but it was constant. Even lines that you haven't heard since the last time you watched this movie, people were laughing at that aren't funny at all.
People were also laughing about the blatant abuse. Yeah, I say blatant. It wasn't to the point when he was literally physically trying to kill her.
No, but he's describing breaking his kid's arm, and people are laughing.
Well, yeah, it was that. It was even before that though. or not before that, but like it was even parts when he's just being shitty to her.
Yeah.
Where it's like, the sad part is she had a really shitty experience too, and everyone fucking knows that.
Right.
It's like you're laughing at a woman, both literally a character and a woman, Shelley Duvall, be abused.
Right.
It's not funny.
Yeah.
Don't fucking laugh at that.
I just like I was astounded. I mean, because like, look, do I think alcohol played a part? Yes, but like, I don't think everybody in that audience was drunk. Like, it was just like the absolute refusal of basically everyone else in the audience to like sit in the moment and feel something and like meet this movie on its terms, rather than like fully sitting on the outside looking in on it. Like that was the thing I was astounded by. That was the experience that I wanted, was to be able to like sit inside this like movie that I love.
One of the most famously moody and atmospheric movies ever made.
And the atmosphere was just like absolutely pulverized by all of these people laughing anytime Jack Nicholson raised his eyebrows.
Had a facial twitch.
Yeah, literally. Like anytime he did anything, they laughed. And I just do not understand like why they refused to just like meet it on its terms.
And I'll be honest, you and I have talked about this a bunch. I'm way more willing and able to like tune out a crowd. I earlier in October, I went and saw Smile with the worst crowd I've ever seen a movie with. Like legitimately people on TikTok, people taking pictures, people having conversations, guy throwing his flip-flops on the ground and throwing candy wrappers on the ground next to me. The worst screening I have ever been to. So like I'm way more willing, and I didn't really notice it until y'all started like Meg got mad during the movie, justifiably so, like completely justifiably so. But like I had just accepted by that point that people thought it was funny, and I was like, this is a really interesting way to watch this movie, was my only thought.
Yeah.
And then it was the people specifically next to y'all that were like the worst, because they just thought everything was hilarious and they were talking the whole time.
Yeah.
They're the annoying people. Everyone else who's like weirdly having this communal experience is fascinating to me. It just sucks that it's like, okay, now in the theater I don't get to have the cool like what are movies? They're communal experiences. Like that's what they should be. That's what they are at their best. You had to put pants on, get in your car, drive to a place, give them money, walk into a theater, sit down, shut off your phone and shut up for 2 hours. And you want to sit there and talk and giggle through it.
Yeah.
Fascinating to me.
Right.
That was the response. So honestly, I found the fact that they thought it was funny, like deeply interesting. And then retrospectively, you go like, well, that movie's about domestic abuse. Why was that funny?
Yeah. I just like, you know, like I think Alamo Drafthouse like definitely lends itself to movie people. And so I would have to imagine the vast majority of that audience has seen this movie before. So it's like they know what they're getting themselves into. I have to imagine. I mean, it's also a movie from, 1980? So it's like, a 42-year-old movie? Like, I have to imagine that most of the people in that audience knew what they're getting themselves into. Or if you are going with somebody who hasn't gone, then, like, at the very least, like, from you describing what this movie, whatever. Like, I have to imagine that most of the people going to this movie knew what they were seeing, knew what they were going to go see. It's not like this is its first run, you know? It's not like this is like them, like the lady next to us that wouldn't shut the hell up. She had read the books, but she hadn't seen the movie. And so this was her first time watching the movie. And so she was just like astounded that they made changes. I was like, lady, this movie is infamous for how much Stephen King hates this adaptation.
It's famously one of the worst adapted pieces of famous media. Not worst in that it's a bad movie, worst in that it's not a good adaptation of the book. It's very different. It's about very different things in a lot of ways. That's what I mean by that. It's famous for the fact that the author has disavowed it to the point that he literally years later heavily teamed up to make Dr. Sleep to try to see his vision of this world.
Right.
It's like props. I mean, you live your life. But it's famously not a good adaptation. But there's a lot of people who would argue it's better than the book.
Does being unfaithful to the movie make it a bad, or to the book a bad?
I don't think it makes The Shining the movie a bad movie. I just think it makes it a technical bad adaptation in the like most like objective terms possible. Like it's not a good adaptation because it's nothing like the book.
and look, this is not me like
this is not a quality conversation. This is me going just like if I were to say what's a great thing that was a really faithful adaptation, The Shining would not be on that list. That's what I'm saying.
See, but I think they're look. Don't get me wrong. This is not me trying. I think this is an interesting discussion. I'm not trying to like check you on this, but I do think there's I think there's something to be said about calling it an unfaithful adaptation versus like a bad adaptation. You know what I mean? Because like I don't think it's bad. I just think it's unfaithful. And I don't think those two things are the same.
Yeah.
Because like I think it's a really good interpretation of the book. Which I guess I'm quibbling over the word bad here, but I do think it's an interesting discussion.
It's a take on the story.
Right. But exactly like I think you having like a different take doesn't make it a bad adaptation. It just makes it an unfaithful one, you know, which I just think is an interesting way of describing it.
Pot kettle, you know, we're saying the same thing,
right?
It's just yeah.
But yeah, I was just anyway. So like I wanted to talk about this because I was like literally like after the movie, I was like so confused because it's like people have made jokes about The Shining and it is like like we've talked about a cultural touchstone, but just the amount with which the entire audience was like laughing and giggling at like not only just like the really, you know, here's Johnny, like all the really famous moments that we recognize, but also a lot of the little quiet, uncomfortable moments that don't make any sense to laugh out loud at. So I just thought that was an interesting thing that happened and an interesting conversation to have.
Audiences suck. It is the hard truth of like modern movie going is that audiences just suck because movie going has been so like, how to put it, like you don't go to the theater and run into this stuff as often. You know what I mean?
You mean like
the theater, the stage. You don't watch stuff on the stage. I mean, you run into bad audience members everywhere you go, but it's not the same level of like across the board. Alamo is this weird thing where I'm super fascinated with it because like in my brain, like my dumb uncivilized brain, I don't know if I'm uncivilized. I just whenever you say, "Oh, you eat there," like it's you get food. It for some reason in my mind, I think of like a dine-in theater where it's like very lo-fi. But Alamo is, you're right, the antithesis of that, where it's so oriented to moviegoers. They have all this special programming beforehand,
which I don't think that helped for The Shining because all of the stuff before The Shining was funny. I think that puts you in more of like a laughy comical mood before the movie starts. Well, I don't think that
it didn't help that they played like that fake trailer where The Shining is a romantic comedy.
Right. And then
I also think people were talking loudly throughout all of that pre-stuff.
Right.
But the funny thing is Alamo Drafthouse before every movie they have a funny scene from a movie where it's essentially meaning be quiet or we'll tell you to leave.
Yeah.
And then afterwards they go, if you talk, if you text, we'll do this, and they'll sometimes we'll send ninjas to escort you out of the building or tomahawk you in the face or whatever.
Or it'll be The Rock doing,
The Rock crushing a phone and
before
being
everything.
We'll send The Rock after you.
Like before Everything Everywhere All at Once, it was what's her name? The lead actress in Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Michelle
Yeoh. They actually had like a video that they shot with Michelle Yeoh for Everything Everywhere All at Once, saying
like
hey,
when we went and saw Black Adam, there was one from Moana because they did.
That was the only one they had.
Yeah,
The Rock.
Well, the same thing when when I went and saw Nope. There, they played a one from Keanu.
Yeah.
And it was those two from Keanu. Doing it. Sometimes it's very fun when they do it. It's always like, oh yeah, they did this before. So Alamo's like interesting, and I wonder if the Shining was just one of those weird famous movies where everyone's like, oh, I saw The Shining 10 years ago. We should go see that's Halloween. And so it brought out all the non-movie, not the non-theatrical experience nerds. Because like The Shining is a great movie to see with a crowd who treats it like it should be treated. And I'm not telling you to not find things funny, but what I'm saying is it's not playing for laughs, and it also isn't like cringy. It's played really well.
Right.
The movie crafts itself so well. It's like not even like I can't even fathom it being construed as a comedy. I can get why you think Jack Nicholson's funny because he's hamming it up.
Yeah.
As he the shot of him like staring into the thing. Like I could imagine non-cinema nerds being like, like he's
He makes a funny face.
He but like it's. I mean, that movie it's dark and it's disturbing and it's great. I mean, it's The Shining, dude.
I don't know, man.
Great movie.
Some people suck.
Recommendations? You got one?
So I was thinking about movies with heavy special effects and about an alien assimilating into a group of people. And the first thing I thought of was The Thing. The Thing is one of my favorite movies of all time. Speaking of freaking Alamo, me and Megan went and saw The Thing at Alamo a few months ago, and that experience was amazing. Nobody was freaking laughing at stuff that didn't make... Anyways, that movie absolutely rules. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. What are you doing with your life? That is my recommendation, is John Carpenter's The Thing. Another movie famously adapted from like a 50s like a 50s I haven't seen the original.
It's the Thing from Another Earth, right? Is the title of the OG?
I am sure you are correct.
I believe there's a crazy stunt in that movie, like a famously insane firewalk in that movie.
Interesting.
That's the only scene from it that I've seen from the OG one. But they light a guy on fire like 3 or 4 times in one take.
Heck yeah.
Like, it's crazy what they do. And at the time you're like, how is he not barbecued? Like, it's crazy.
Turns out that man died.
Yeah, he's like the guy from the Creature from the Black Lagoon. He's dead now. That suit took on so much water. That didn't actually happen. He's not dead. Whatever. Just talking about another like revolutionary special effect kind of thing. Anyway. I'd also recommend The Thing. That movie rips so hard. It's so good. My recommendation is one of the like a billion Body Snatcher like spin-offs. It came out in the 90s. It was like this weird one that got greenlit after the success of Scream. So it had like a similar budget, similar kind of young, cool cast. It is called The Faculty. It is
right. It's Robert Rodriguez, right?
Yes, Robert Rodriguez. That'll be a podcast episode during some Halloween because I really like that movie. It's like the super, super fun version of this.
Yeah.
That is also like weirdly interesting as a pop culture relic because it's kind of completely forgotten.
Yeah.
In a way that I don't think it deserves. I think it's actually quite good.
Yeah.
So I would watch The Faculty. I'm pretty sure it's on HBO. If HBO still exists when you're listening to this.
Who knows?
Barbarian is popping off on HBO at the moment.
Yep.
Anyway, that's my recommendation. I think that movie rules. I think both Body Snatchers movies rule, and they're both so similar and different in the coolest ways. So those would be. I recommend go watch that stuff. You want to just get into a weird assimilation parable,
right?
Just watch that triple feature.
Yeah,
and then watch The Thing for like the best time of your entire life.
Yeah, watch. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Thing, and then The Faculty. That'll be a weird...
You'll have a very interesting time.
And then watch Body Snatchers, and then watch The Invasion.
And then just to cool off, watch Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
And then watch Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
It has nothing to do with anything. I just like it.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, now look at that. Look at that. You got a bunch of stuff to watch.
Yeah.
So, like, do that. Or don't. I don't know. Live your life.